The year was 2394, and the Earth looked calm from orbit. Blue oceans stretched wide beneath the white clouds. From this distance, no one would guess that the planet stood on the edge of war. Commander Elias Kane stood in the wide glass chamber of Earth Defense Command, the largest military station in orbit. The station circled Earth like a silent guardian. Hundreds of ships floated outside, lined up like steel giants waiting for a signal. But no signal came. Kane watched the glowing message on the central screen. The words had been there for 3 years, unchanged. The message came from the Galactic Alliance, the most powerful force in the galaxy. It read in simple, sharp words. Submit to the laws of the Galactic Alliance. You have 30 days to comply. If you remain silent, we will take your silence as defiance. We will respond. No reply had ever been sent. Kane had read the message hundreds of times. He knew every word, every space between them. He knew the faces of the Alliance Council who had sent it. Cold, alien faces filled with pride and power. But he never answered them. He believed silence was humanity's last defense. The chamber doors slid open with a soft hum. General Soren, a tall, gray-haired officer, walked in with a group of Earth's top political leaders. Their faces showed worry. Their voices whispered sharp and low. "Kane," Soren said, stepping forward, "we can't keep this up much longer. The people are scared. Our allies on Mars and Titan demand answers. The Alliance fleet is moving toward us. You need to respond before it's too late." Kane turned to face them. His sharp eyes showed no fear. "We have already responded," he said calmly. "We said nothing." One of the leaders, Minister Reen, stepped forward. She was young but spoke with the voice of someone used to being obeyed. "Silence isn't an answer," she argued. "It's suicide. The people want peace. If we open talks, maybe they'll listen. Maybe they'll let us keep our worlds." Kane shook his head. He walked toward the large window that showed the fleets beyond. "They won't listen. The Alliance does not share power. They demand control. If we speak, they will only hear surrender." Soren sighed and rubbed his face. "We need time, Kane. We need hope." Kane stayed silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice firm but steady. "Time is what we lose if we answer. As long as we say nothing, they wait. They don't know if we are afraid or if we are ready. Our silence makes them doubt. That is our strength." The room fell quiet. No one spoke. No one dared challenge him again. They all knew the truth, but they feared to face it. Suddenly, the station's alert sirens flashed red. A voice came over the comms. "Commander Kane, long-range scans show heavy fleet movement near the outer rim. Alliance warships entering Sector 7. Estimated arrival at Mars defense border in 7 days." The leaders looked at each other in shock. "They're coming," Reen whispered. Kane nodded slowly. "Let them come," he said. He turned back to the screen where the message still glowed. He reached out and shut it off for the first time in 3 years. "Prepare all forces," Kane ordered. "We hold the line. No response. No words. We meet them in silence." The leaders left the chamber one by one. Soren stayed behind for a moment. "You believe this will work?" he asked softly. Kane didn't turn to face him. He kept his eyes on the dark space beyond the glass. "I don't know," Kane whispered, "but I know we cannot beg for our freedom." Soren nodded and left the chamber. Kane stood alone, watching the stars, knowing the true battle was finally beginning. The news spread like wildfire across the human colonies. By the next sunrise on Earth, every colony knew the Galactic Alliance fleet was moving. People on Mars, Europa, and Titan watched the news in silence, their faces pale with fear. On Mars, miners left their machines standing in the red dust. On Europa, scientists paused their work in frozen tunnels beneath the ice. On Titan, farmers looked up at the dark orange sky and wondered if they would live to see another day. Earth's leaders sent messages to the colonies, telling them to stay calm. But fear had already taken hold. In the underground city of Ares Prime, the largest human settlement on Mars, people gathered in public squares. Giant screens showed images of the Alliance fleet, ships as big as cities, shaped like blades and towers, moving toward human space. Military patrols tried to keep order, but it was clear the people were already preparing for the worst. Back on Earth Defense Command, Commander Elias Kane stood in the strategy room with General Soren and his staff. Holographic maps showed the enemy's position. The Alliance fleet was only days away from reaching the Mars defense line, Earth's outer shield. Kane had ordered silence. No response, no message, no surrender. But not everyone agreed with his plan. Late that night, in the quiet halls of the station, Minister Reen met with two other leaders, Director Harless, head of the Trade Council, and Admiral Sorov, commander of Titan security forces. They spoke in whispers, far from the ears of Kane's soldiers. "This is madness," Harless said, pacing the floor. "Kane is gambling with all of us. We need to talk to the Alliance. We need to make a deal." Reen nodded. "I've already sent a private message to their ambassador. I told them we're willing to negotiate. If we surrender control of our fleets, maybe they'll spare our worlds." Sorov looked uneasy. "And if Kane finds out?" Reen's voice turned cold. "Then Kane will be removed. One way or another, humanity will survive." They didn't know that someone had already heard them. Captain Lien, one of Kane's closest officers, had followed Reen after growing suspicious. She recorded every word of their secret meeting. Without wasting a second, she rushed to Kane's chambers. Kane listened to the recording in silence. His jaw tightened. His hands clenched behind his back. When it ended, he looked at Lien with cold eyes. "Bring them to me," Kane ordered. By sunrise, Reen, Harless, and Sorov stood in chains before Kane and his staff in the command hall. Soldiers lined the walls, silent and still. "You have betrayed every human life in this system," Kane said, his voice like steel. "You tried to surrender our freedom without permission. You would have handed us to the Alliance like slaves." Reen didn't flinch. "We try to save humanity, Commander. You've left us with no choice." Kane stepped closer. "You always have a choice. You chose fear." Reen met his eyes. "And you chose death." Kane turned away from her and looked at the soldiers. "Lock them away. They will not speak for us again." The soldiers obeyed. Reen and the others were taken away. Kane knew this was only the beginning. The enemy wasn't just coming from space. It was already here, hidden in the hearts of those who had lost hope. Later, Kane stood in the war room, staring at the map again. The Alliance fleet was closer now, less than 5 days to the Mars defense line. General Soren entered quietly. "More reports of panic in the colonies," Soren said. "People are scared, Kane. They're starting to question if you're leading us to destruction." Kane didn't look away from a map. "Fear is a weapon, General," Kane replied. "We cannot let it break us before the first shot is fired." Soren lowered his voice. "What if they don't wait for a shot? What if they send diplomats again? What will you do?" Kane turned to face him, his eyes dark and steady. "I will meet them," Kane said, "but I will say nothing." Across the stars, the Alliance fleet continued its silent march toward Mars. And deep in the hearts of millions, whispers of fear grew louder. The Mars defense line stretched across space like a wall of steel and fire. Dozens of human warships floated in formation, ready for battle. These ships were smaller than the Alliance dreadnoughts, but they carried heavy weapons and skilled pilots. Alongside them were defense stations built on Mars moons, Phobos and Deimos, armed with rail cannons and missile launchers. They were Earth's first line of defense. In the command center of the EDS Ironclad, the largest ship in the defense line, Commander Elias Kane stood before a wide window. His officers worked quietly at their stations. All eyes were fixed on the holographic map showing the approaching enemy ships. Kane knew the time had come. General Soren entered, holding a report. "Scouts have crossed into our territory," Soren said. "Small ships moving fast. They're testing us." Kane nodded. He expected this. The Alliance never attacked all at once. They liked to send small groups first to see how their enemies reacted, to see if they would panic, surrender, or show weakness. "Hold positions," Kane ordered. "Let them come closer." Hours passed. The scouts moved deeper into human space. They flew near the outer stations, scanning the defense lines. Kane watched their movements carefully. Then, one of his officers, Captain Lien, turned from her screen. "Commander, the scouts are starting to broadcast a message," she said. "Audio only." Kane's jaw tightened. He knew what was coming. He nodded for her to play it. A cold, metallic voice filled the room. This is the Galactic Alliance. We come to offer you peace one last time. Open communication now and surrender your military power. Failure to respond will be seen as an act of war. The message played twice, then went silent. The officers looked at Kane, waiting for his answer. Kane stood still, staring out at the stars. After a long pause, he spoke clearly. Send no reply. Prepare to engage. The officers carried out his orders. Defense systems came online. Cannons charged. Shield powered up. Pilots strapped into their ships. No one spoke. Everyone moved like a single machine, trained and ready. The Alliance scouts moved even closer, weaving between the defense stations, trying to provoke a response. But Kane waited. Hold, he whispered. The scouts fired warning shots, small blasts of energy that lit up the black sky. Still, Kane waited. Closer, he said. Finally, the scouts made their mistake. They moved too deep, flying right between Phobos Station and Ironclad's firing range. Kane's eyes narrowed. Fire. The sky exploded with light. Rail cannons fired metal slugs at incredible speed. Missiles streaked through space, locking onto the enemy ships. The first scout ship shattered into debris. The second and third tried to turn back, but the Ironclad's main gun fired a blast so powerful it tore both ships apart. The last scout ship turned to flee. Kane gave no mercy. All ships pursue. Destroy it. Human warships chased the lone scout, cutting off its path. In minutes, the ship was gone. Nothing left but dust and wreckage. The officers cheered softly, some sighing in relief. It was their first real victory. Small but important. Kane didn't celebrate. He knew this was only the start. Later, Kane stood in the communication room, staring at the empty message log. The Alliance had not sent another message since the scouts were destroyed. Kane knew they were watching. They had tested humanity and received their answer, not in words, but in action. General Soren entered, his face serious. Do you think they'll attack now? Soren asked. Kane nodded slowly. They will, he replied. And next time, they won't send scouts. They'll send the full fleet. On the other side of the stars, High Chancellor Virex watched the same reports from his command ship. His pale, inhuman face showed no emotion. He turned to his officers. Prepare the invasion fleet, Virex ordered. They have chosen war. Back on Mars, Kane walked through the shipyards, looking at the soldiers and workers who were preparing for the next battle. He saw fear in their eyes, but also something else, determination. He stopped and spoke to the nearest group of soldiers. We didn't answer their words, Kane said. We answered with fire, and when they come again, we'll do it again. Not because we want war, but because we want to live free. The soldiers stood straighter. They saluted him without saying a word. Kane nodded and walked on, knowing the real battle was now coming fast. The days after the scout battle were heavy with silence. No new messages came from the Galactic Alliance. No ships moved in or out of the defense zone. The stars hung quiet and still. It felt like the galaxy was holding its breath. On Earth Defense Command, Commander Elias Kane watched the fleet reports as they updated hour by hour. His people had won the first strike, but Kane knew better than to celebrate. That victory was nothing to the Alliance. It was just a small scratch on a giant beast. In the war chamber, General Soren stood beside Kane, looking at the latest scans. The fleet has stopped just beyond our borders, Soren reported. They've gathered near Juno Point. Over 100 warships. Kane's eyes stayed on the map. Juno Point was just 2 jumps away from Mars. The defense lines stood ready, but the Alliance fleet outnumbered them by more than 2 to 1. Any new messages? Kane asked quietly. Soren shook his head. Nothing. Not since the scouts were destroyed. Kane leaned on the edge of the table, staring down at the holographic stars. The silence was louder than any threat. He knew the next move was coming soon. It was just a matter of time. Later that night, the silence broke. Kane stood alone in his quarters when the comm system lit up with an incoming signal. It was marked Alliance priority. Kane allowed it through. The face of High Chancellor Virex appeared on the screen. His pale skin seemed almost like stone. His black, insect-like eyes held no emotion. His voice was deep and slow. Commander Elias Kane, I have watched your silence long enough. Kane stood tall, but said nothing. Virex continued. You had your chance to submit. You chose defiance. You chose death for your people. Still, I offer one last warning. Stand down your forces. Surrender your weapons. Bow to the Alliance, and we will spare your worlds. The screen went dark again. No countdown. No second offer. Kane stood there for a long time. The next morning, the political leaders gathered once again in the strategy chamber. Minister Reen was gone, locked away after her betrayal. Now, the remaining council members looked more divided than ever. General Soren stood before them all and spoke first. They gave us one last chance, Soren said. We all heard it. They'll attack soon. Some council members leaned forward. We should open talks, one of them said. It may not be too late. Others shook their heads. No, another replied. We already answer with fire. They won't respect weakness now. The arguments grew louder, but Kane raised his hand, silencing the room. There will be no talks, Kane said, clear and firm. We've come too far to kneel now. One council member stood. You're risking the end of our people, Kane. Kane faced them all, his voice steady. No, I'm fighting for the right of our people to decide their future. Not some council of aliens who rule through fear. The room fell silent. Prepare all forces, Kane ordered. Send word to Mars, Europa, and Titan. Bring all fleets to the defense line. He paused, then gave his final order. We hold the line. To the last ship if we must. Hours later, Kane stood in the Ironclad's command bridge. The fleet began to move. Hundreds of ships turned toward Mars, ready to make their stand. Kane's comm officer turned to him with wide eyes. Commander, the Alliance fleet has started its full advance toward Mars. Kane took a deep breath. His heart felt heavy, but his face showed no fear. He opened the ship-wide channel. All hands, battle stations. The time has come. As alarms filled the halls, Kane watched the dark space ahead. He whispered softly to himself. Let them come. Across the stars, High Chancellor Virex watched the human fleet moving to block his path. He raised one long, clawed hand toward his officers. Crush them. The Great Alliance fleet began its final push. The stars above Mars burned with the light of engines and weapons. The Alliance fleet had arrived. They came with overwhelming force. Huge warships, shaped like blades, dark and smooth, moved into position. Smaller fighter crafts swarmed like insects around them. Their fleet covered the sky like a moving wall. On the other side, Earth's defense fleet stood waiting. Human ships were fewer, but their crews were ready. They knew they were outnumbered. They knew the enemy's power. Still, they held their ground. In the command center of the EDS Ironclad, Commander Elias Kane stood at the front. His officers watched the enemy's movements on the glowing tactical map. General Soren leaned toward Kane. His voice was low. They've come with everything they have. Kane nodded. He had expected this. There would be no tricks this time. No scouts. No messages. This was the final push. The enemy moved first. A wave of Alliance fighters broke off from the main fleet and charged toward the defense line. Their engines burned bright as they fired their first shots. The battle began. Rail cannons roared from Phobos and Deimos. Missiles streaked through space, hunting enemy ships. Human fighters launched from the defense stations and capital ships. Explosions filled the black sky as both sides clashed. Inside the Ironclad, Kane watched it all unfold. He gave sharp, clear orders. Hold the line. Protect the stations. Focus fire on the lead destroyers. The human fleet fought hard. Every ship gave its best, but the Alliance kept pushing wave after wave. Kane could see the danger building. They're trying to break our center, Soren warned. Kane knew they couldn't let that happen. He turned to Captain Lien. Order the Titan fleet to flank them from the right. Tell the Mars defense cannons to fire at will. Lien nodded and relayed the orders. The defense grid came alive with heavy blasts. Massive energy cannons fired from Mars' surface, striking several Alliance ships. Still, the Alliance kept advancing. The battle grew more violent. Human ships exploded one by one. Fighters were torn apart. Defense stations on Phobos took heavy damage. Kane could feel the wall starting to break. Suddenly, a new signal flashed on Kane's screen. It was a direct message from the Alliance flagship. Kane recognized the signal code. It was High Chancellor Virex. Kane allowed the message through. The cold, alien face of Virex appeared once again. His black eyes showed no fear, no anger, only cold calculation. Elias Kane, Virex said calmly, "You cannot win this battle. You have already lost more than you can afford. Your people will suffer if you continue." Kane didn't respond. He stood in silence, staring into the enemy's face. "Why do you stay silent?" Virex asked. His voice was colder now. "What do you hope to gain? You think silence makes you strong? It makes you foolish." The bridge fell quiet. The officers waited for Kane to respond. Kane took a slow breath. Then at last he spoke. His voice was clear. His words were few. "We are free." That was all. Kane closed the channel. Virex stared at the empty screen on his ship. His sharp teeth showed as he hissed in anger. "Destroy them all. Burn their worlds." The Alliance fleet began its final attack. More ships charged the defense line. Giant siege ships moved into position, ready to fire at Mars itself. The human fleet struggled to hold them back. Kane watched as enemy ships broke through the outer defenses. He clenched his fists. They were running out of time. Captain Lien turned to him. "They're targeting Mars, Commander. We can't stop them all." Kane knew what had to be done. It was time to use the last weapon they had prepared in secret. "Send the signal to Europa Command," Kane ordered. "Activate Project Aegis." Lien's eyes widened. "Commander, are you sure?" Kane nodded. "It's the only way." A silent signal was sent across space to the Europa Defense Station, deep beneath the frozen ice. There, a massive energy core powered the Aegis defense grid, a secret planetary shield system designed to protect Earth and its colonies. The order was clear. Activate Aegis. Back at Mars, the ground began to glow. Massive shield towers rose from the surface. A bright energy field spread across the planet like a second skin. The Alliance ships fired their heavy weapons, but their blasts bounced off the new shield. The Aegis grid had come online. The human fleet pushed back with new strength. Kane gave the order to counterattack. "All ships charge. Drive them back." The space over Mars became a storm of light and fire. Ships collided. Cannons roared. The human fleet fought with everything they had left. They knew this was the end, one way or another. Kane stood firm on the bridge, his eyes locked on the battle. He knew they had only bought time, not victory. The enemy would not give up so easily. But for now, Mars stood strong. The battle raged for hours over Mars. The Aegis shield held, glowing like a dome of light over the planet. Human ships circled close to the shield, using it to block the enemy's heavy fire. But the Alliance fleet kept coming. Commander Elias Kane stood on the EDS Ironclad's command deck, his jaw tight. The tactical map showed red markers filling the screen, enemy ships surrounding the human fleet on all sides. Kane knew this was the final moment. If they lost Mars, Earth would fall next. General Soren stood beside him, his face pale but steady. "We can't hold much longer," Soren said. "Our ships are breaking apart." Kane knew it was true. One by one, human ships were being destroyed. The defense stations on Phobos and Deimos had already fallen, but Mars was still standing. Captain Lien turned toward Kane. "Commander, the enemy flagship has entered firing range." Kane's eyes narrowed. On the map, the largest enemy ship moved forward. It was called the Sovereign, and Kane knew who was aboard. High Chancellor Virex. Kane knew this was his chance. If they could bring down the Sovereign, the Alliance fleet might break. Without their leader, they might retreat. He leaned forward, giving his next order with sharp clarity. "Target the Sovereign. All ships follow my lead. We end this now." The Ironclad turned its massive engines toward the enemy flagship. Other human ships fell in behind it, forming a spearhead. Kane opened the fleet-wide channel. "This is Commander Kane. The enemy stands before us. If we fall here, we fall free. Fight with me. Fight for Earth. Fight for every world that still breathes free air." The fleet roared forward. Enemy ships moved to block them. The sky turned white with explosions. Human fighters flew ahead, clearing a path. The Ironclad's cannons blasted through smaller ships, pushing closer to the heart of the enemy fleet. But the Sovereign was huge, twice the size of the ironclad. Its hull was thick and smooth, nearly impossible to break. Kane knew they had one chance. "Bring us head on," Kane ordered. Soren's eyes widened. "Commander, that's suicide." Kane stood firm. "It's the only way." The ironclad charged straight at the Sovereign. Enemy cannons lit up the sky, striking the ironclad's shields again and again. Sparks flew from the control panels. The ship groaned under the pressure. Inside the Sovereign, High Chancellor Virex watched in silence. He turned to his officers. "Let them come. Crush them when they break." But Kane had a different plan. As the ironclad closed the distance, he gave his final order. "Fire the core cannon. All power to the forward battery." The ironclad's main gun, hidden until now, began to charge. A deep hum filled the ship as energy built to dangerous levels. "Sir, the gun can't fire at this range without tearing the ship apart," an officer warned. Kane didn't blink. "Do it." The gun fired. A massive blast of pure energy shot forward, striking the Sovereign head-on. The enemy's shields flared and cracked. The blast punched through the hull, cutting deep into the heart of the ship. The ironclad shook violently. Systems failed. Lights flickered, but the damage was done. Inside the Sovereign, alarm screamed. Fire and smoke filled the command deck. Virex stood in shock as his ship began to break apart. "Impossible," he hissed. Kane's voice came through the comm system, calm and clear. "You wanted an answer, Virex. Here it is. We do not kneel." The Sovereign exploded in a massive wave of light. The Alliance fleet hesitated. Their leader was gone. Their largest ship destroyed. One by one, they began to pull back. Ships turned and fled toward the edge of human space. The human fleet had won. The ironclad drifted, damaged but still alive. Inside, the crew cheered weakly, their voices filled with relief and disbelief. Kane stood at the window, staring at the empty space where the Sovereign had been. General Soren stepped beside him. "You did it," Soren whispered. "We did it." Kane nodded slowly. "But at what cost?" The battle was over, but the price had been high. More than half the human fleet was gone. Thousands were dead. Mars had survived, but its defenses were shattered. Still, they were free. Kane opened the comm system, sending a message to all ships, all colonies, and all surviving stations. "This is Commander Kane. Mars stand. Earth stands. We stand. Let this be known across the stars. We will not be ruled. We will not be silenced." He closed the channel and sat down at the command chair for the first time since the battle began. He felt the weight of every loss. But in his heart, he knew they had done what had to be done. They had made their final stand. The skies above Mars were silent again. Wreckage floated in orbit like broken bones. Human ships, damaged and scorched, drifted slowly toward repair stations. Fires still burned in the ruins of Phobos Station. Across the system, every colony had received the same message. Humanity had survived. On Earth, billions gathered in cities, streets, and homes, watching the news streams. They saw images of the ironclad, battered but still standing. They heard the reports. The Sovereign, the pride of the Alliance fleet, had been destroyed. The invaders had fled. Cheers echoed across continents. People cried, laughed, and held each other. But behind every celebration, they knew the truth. The cost had been higher than they ever imagined. On Mars, Kane stood in a dark chamber overlooking the wreckage. General Soren and Captain Lien stood beside him. None of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Soren broke the silence. "We lost half the fleet, most of our defense stations are gone, and the colonies are in shock." Kane nodded slowly. He already knew. The victory felt heavy in his chest, not light like he had hoped. "And yet," Soren added, "we're still here." Captain Lien turned toward Kane. "What now, Commander?" "The Alliance is still out there. They'll rebuild. They'll come again." Kane kept his eyes on the stars. "Yes," he said softly, "but next time, they'll remember what happened here." He turned to face them both. "Start the rebuilding. Strengthen the colonies. Train the next fleet. We've won a battle, but the future is still ours to defend." Soren and Lien nodded and left the chamber, leaving Kane alone. Later, Kane stood in the Ironclad's private recording room. He opened a message log, set to broadcast to all human worlds. He took a deep breath and began to speak. His voice was clear, but heavy with meaning. This is Commander Elias Kane. We have faced the strongest force in the galaxy. We have paid with blood, ships, and lives. But we stand. We answered their demand not with words, but with silence. We did not beg. We did not kneel. And when they came to break us, we stood together. We stood free. Let the galaxy hear this truth. We stayed silent because freedom has no need for permission. He ended the recording and sent it across every channel. On Mars, Europa, Titan, and Earth, people heard his words. They stood together, silent at first. Then, one by one, they raised their fists. No more fear. No more doubt. Humanity was free, but they knew the price they had paid. Kane stood one last time at the wide window of the Ironclad, looking out at the stars. The galaxy was still full of enemies. He knew peace would not last forever. But for the first time, humanity had made its stand, and they had answered in their own way, with silence.